3 o'clock, friends. Today is Thursday, January 9th, 2020, and we are having a special meeting to discuss revisions or not to the manager's contract and discuss the applicant we interviewed last week for the position of township manager. So let's start with the pledge, if you'll join us, and then we'll get going. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Roll call, Randy, please.
Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand. Trustee Everson.
Here.
Trustee Marks.
Present.
Treasurer Johnson.
Here.
Clerk Rattari is here, and Supervisor Durant.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard, Civil Counsel Roger Zappa. Committee members present is Mike Springer from Planning, Recreation, and Roads, and my deputy clerk is here.
Thanks. We've got lots of people here. Any public comment? Anybody want to start by, feel free to come up to the podium and state your name, please, and address.
Good afternoon. My name is Neil Jandrin. I live at 425 West Ohio Street in the city of Marquette. I own 3 properties in the township on County Road HQ, a new development we built 3 years ago. I just wanted to speak in favor of Dennis LaMotta, who I have known for almost 40 years, from the days when he managed the Freedom gas station in Marquette. I understand I'm here on my own will. I understand that the current manager spoke in favor of you people hiring Dennis. And, you know, I do a lot of work at Salvation Army in Marquette County, and we get captains in every 3 to 4 years, and it seems that after 15 years, whatever Mr. Gerard has been here, Dennis has, I believe, 6 years as a supervisor prior to this. So he knows the name of the streets in the township, he knows a lot of the people in the township, and I think for a flow in the township, I love what the township is doing, by the way, but I think for a flow and for everything to remain on a nice, even flow, I would think that somebody that is familiar with the township and the residents and the business people would be a real good choice. I thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate that. Anybody else wish to make any comments?
Tom Swick, own some businesses in the area, in the township. And as you know, when we worked on this project and several projects, we found that Dennis to be just great at pulling everybody together, getting everybody going in the same direction, and was, I think the one thing I liked about him was I noticed he could go down and talk with the maintenance people in the township, and he could talk to the board people, and he was able to really make the connection and was well advised in how to deal with different people, and you got to deal when you're in the township. You got to any township. You got to deal with every kind of personality and person you can imagine. So we really enjoyed working with him on all our projects, and we enjoyed the way he brought everybody together. Even sometimes when they weren't together before it was done, he seemed to have it worked out where everybody was together. So I just wanted to just lend my support for him.
Tom, what's your address, please?
My address is 1040 Vistana Drive
Okay, thank you.
in Marquette, Michigan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to share any thoughts before we start?
We did have, oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna read.
We just have a few that want.
Oh, you have that?
I do have it, but
Okay.
do you
Sit
want?
back down. Just kidding. Do you want to read it? You can read it, Todd.
Here, Todd, if you want to read it, that'd be better than me.
Get back.
My third grade teacher was Mrs. Sickman. She taught me that way.
You remember
mean to
that far
scare
back?
Well, that was a good year, yeah. Before I read this, I called Randy about a month ago and I said, Randy, I'm upset with you. And he said, what now, Todd? And what now? And I said, well, you're leaving, and that was a few weeks ago. And then over the weekend, I had heard that you were going to talk to Dennis, or you did talk to Dennis. And I called Randy and I said, I'm not upset with you anymore.
Excuse me, Todd, we need a name and address.
Sure, Todd Nordyke at 30, well, I've been at 3060 US 41. I'm at 3020 US 41 now,
Thank you.
Westwood Mall. But I'm not upset with you anymore because one of the reasons 10 years ago I didn't locate in Negaunee Township or Ishpeming Township or the city of Marquette was there was no can-do attitude. There was no attitude that said, they didn't say no. The whole team doesn't say no. They say, let's think about how we can do this. And I ended up building a tower on a building on a pillar hooked to other pillars, of all things, based on UPCO's challenges. So we had challenges, but it wasn't no. Okay, and Dennis and Randy were around at that time. So I wrote a letter and I said, Randy, thank you for the note. Since a board trustee asked for public comments last night, I would like to comment, and I am in favor of hiring Dennis Limita. I began my township work about a decade ago, and Dennis was a bright, positive force. For example, years ago together, we went to Lions Field, and that was in shambles that day. I still have pictures, and it's on the internet on our news archive. And Dennis, along with Randy and Pete and several others, got behind the rejuvenation and repair of that field. And Dennis helped obtain donations because we wondered, where was that money going to come from? He actually secured donations back in the day for that park, and his team and other volunteers highly improved that place. And look at how we enjoy that place now. In fact, I don't think we should add anything more to the park. I mean, it's pretty much full. Maybe buy some houses and expand it or something. The main reason I relocated my business about a decade ago from Marquette, city of, to Marquette Township was because of two people. And that's Randy and that's Dennis. And they are can-do people. They don't say no immediately to progress or possible change, but rather, let's see how we can get this done. And just like Tom said, you deal with a lot of people, and you need that attitude. So I said, Randy, I'm sad you're leaving, but please hire Dennis as part of the new A-team. And Marquette Township has grown to be known as the fastest growing township state of Michigan. And I think where Dennis has been working has been in the top 3 as far as growth. So as we look forward to the future, in my mind, he'd be a perfect guy to hire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Anybody else want to share any thoughts?
Jason McCarthy, 325 Northwoods Road. When I started with the township in 2011, I was also being recruited for the city of Marquette by the late John Keevala. And when I interviewed with Marquette Township, Dennis Limita brought out a plan in the Heartwood Forest property of ball fields and an amphitheater, and he had a vision for the community that not many people have as a layperson. And I hope this isn't a conflict of any kind, but I'm just speaking from the heart as a resident and somebody who will end up having to work with the next manager. But the assets and the attributes that Dennis have, you can't teach that. You can't teach personality or the ability to bring people together, as Tom had suggested. And I just think of the 4 candidates that you've interviewed, hands down, he has the most experience relevant to the position and relevant to the job and what it entails every day. Essentially, Randy has been the face of the community for 18 years, and he's done a fine job. Technically, he's probably one of the most professional and sound individuals I've ever worked for. Dennis may not have that similar savvy from the technical side that Dennis does, or that Randy does, but it's something that can be learned. I mean, we've all been through budget cycles. We know what's going on. But Dennis is somebody that can carry the community forward and has a vision for the community that, you know, most people that were applying for that job would not necessarily have. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Anyone else wish to share any thoughts? Okay, go ahead, Randy. We have 3 folks who would, well, 2 now because Todd already read his.
Yeah, there was,
Share.
I received 2 additional letters to be read during public comment, so I'll try to do that as speedy as I can. The first letter was from Frank Stabile, and he's the chairman of the Marquette Township Business Association. And he commented that, Randy, I look forward to working with Dennis Limata as the new township manager. Mr. Limata, previous position as township supervisor provides him with a wealth of background experience into the position. And again, I look forward to Mr. Limata's experience and dedication to managing the affairs of the township and working with the Marquette Township Business Association as well. That's the first letter. The second letter is from Mr. Fred Grandchamp. And he states, Randy, I notice that the board members are requesting the public's input regarding the candidates for township manager. As a former owner of a business located in the township and part of a group continuing to develop properties in the township, I would attend this afternoon's meeting if I were in town, but I'm traveling out of town. I hope you can bring my email to the board in support of Dennis Limata for the position of township manager. And he goes further on to say, as a business person in Marquette Township, I had several occasions to work with Dennis when he was supervisor of the township on various projects. He always did research and ensured that he was knowledgeable on any topic before making a decision on it. In working with him and observing his actions, it was clear that the best interest of Marquette Township residents were his first priority while still assisting in effectively the commercial growth of the township. In my opinion, Dennis has long-term foresight that is needed to effectively help Marquette Township continue to grow, the managerial skills that will enable him to work successfully with board members and employees, as well as the ability to communicate effectively with the general public. He is hardworking, fair-minded, and conducts himself in a professional manner, so he would clearly be an asset to the township. Therefore, he'd be an excellent choice to step into your shoes and continue your commitment to the growth and prosperity of Marquette Township. And that was from Fred Grandchamp.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. Thank you, Frank and Fred. Go ahead, Dave.
I received communication from Dan Pompo this morning. It was written yesterday. And it says, sitting here in the Detroit airport, I have watched the township meeting from last night. I felt I would share my comments with you. First, I'm sorry for missing the first special meeting dealing with the interview of candidates for our manager. I have always felt that the township should have hired a firm to search for the candidates for the position. The board decided to go to different directions, so I didn't have any great expectations for responses. To my surprise, a real gem appeared in the candidate from Newberry. She gave a great interview with very detailed, thought-provoking answers. She had a new and fresh attitude towards our township. As you can imagine, I was surprised when she failed to get the votes. The 2 reasons I heard as to why she didn't get approved was someone just didn't feel right about her, and the other was she didn't meet the qualifications of having the job for 3 years. Wow, I must have missed it she just missed it by 3 months. Well, if that wasn't enough, after the vote, a trustee made an untrue comment about her departure from her previous employment. if not a slanderous comment, then at least an extremely unprofessional public comment made by an elected official. If that wasn't bad enough, the trustee immediately made a motion to phone a candidate who removed his name from consideration and asked him if he is still interested. This had me thinking. After the board decided to interview candidate number 4, whose name was pretty much let out, I was thinking of attending this meeting. As things happened, I was unable to attend at the last minute, but after watching it, I was glad I wasn't there. Thinking it couldn't be worse than the last meeting, I was once again surprised. After the interview, a motion was made to hire him on the spot. Contract issues were even discussed. When the treasurer stated that this is not the way the last meeting was done and a special meeting should be set up to discuss the hiring, a trustee proceeded to yell and berate the treasurer. I happen to agree with the treasurer that this was a form of harassment and should never be tolerated. After this fiasco, I, as well as other residents, have to conclude that certain members of the board had only intentions of hiring candidate number 4, no matter who showed up to the interview. One would wonder why this is so. Perhaps a staff member doesn't want to work with a woman. Perhaps they didn't want to get rid of the good old boys club, or they were concerned she had a different outlook on how the township is to be run. As far as I'm concerned, the whole procedure has been embarrassing and unprofessional. That's it.
Okay, thanks Dave, and thanks Dan for that input. Pete, were you first, I think?
Over the last couple of days, I talked to about 7 different people. I'll just name them. Todd Nordyke already talked this afternoon. Tom Swick, Bob Carley, Joe Greet, who used to be with the leader for Public Works, Ellen Sargent, Cliff Stammer, and Jerry Irby from the Board of Light and Power. And they're all in favor of hiring. He basically said that he'd make a great choice for our new manager.
Dan?
I got one letter that I'd like to read. I got an email this morning from Ron DeMars, who is a former fire chief for the township. So, I'd like to take this opportunity to highly recommend Dennis Limata for the township manager's position. I served under Dennis during his term as township supervisor and as fire chief prior to my retirement in 2018. I was extremely impressed by Dennis's organizational skills. His attention to detail consistently amazed me during his briefings. I know Dennis's ability to organize budget time will serve well, and he will serve well in the township manager's position. Thank you for the consideration in this matter, and he left his number if anybody wanted to contact him.
Okay, thanks Dan and Ron. Any other board member comment? Sorry, I'm just making quite a few notes here. Anything else? Okay. I did receive one letter too, but he didn't say I should read it, so I'm gonna err on the side of caution, just to be safe. If it comes up, I can read it at another time. I don't believe we have any conflicts of interest that would be involved here. So we'll get into policy discussion, consideration, and development. The first part of our agenda is discuss the manager's contract. Randy?
I move to accept the agenda first.
Good idea.
Support.
Too much going on. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I had too many notes. It totally covered it up. Okay. If you gentlemen remember, this is probably the 3rd time I've brought the manager's contract to you. I want to do a little bit of background, explain where we're going and what my thought process is, and then I'd like to have Randy explain the difference between the 2 options I'm trying to give you. Anytime we have a contract that comes before us, we look through it. it's just prudent. We did the same thing a few months ago when we had Kirk brought a contract to us for renewal on the trash and stuff, solid waste. It's only professional to look at a contract and see where you are. Sometimes the contracts are 4 or 5 years old. Things change in the meantime, okay? So my idea with the contract to show you was, is this what you want to present? And the reason I asked is because there are alternatives. This contract was pretty much designed for Randy because this is what he was requesting. A new manager coming in can do the same thing. We make a proposal, we make an offer, whatever the conditions are, and they say, no, thanks, I would like to have this, I don't need health insurance, I want 2 extra weeks of vacation pay, whatever. It's negotiated, okay? This contract is designed for Randy. I wanted to make sure that the new candidate had the benefit of the doubt to give them a more generic contract. If you don't want to do that and you want to present this one, that's fine. But it's my job to bring you different ideas, opportunities, suggestions, and if the board chooses not to, that's totally fine. Now, Randy, if you could explain the difference between this contract, how it's set up, based on the compensation system, and if we chose to have a separate contract, more generic.
Well, just a couple of points first. The township has a couple of systems in place that have been adopted by the board over time since 2002. When I first came into the position in 2002, there was really no compensation system and there was really no system of job descriptions. And that was one of the first projects that I was given by the board at the time, was to resolve those issues. So the board did adopt a formal classification and compensation system, and that system is in place through today. And what it does is it evaluates every job within the organization based upon the qualification, skills, and abilities that are necessary in that job, as compared to a set of 10 specific factors. And those factors each measure the level of responsibility, authority, and involvement with internal and external operations of the township. Those come up to a total, the 10 of them come up to a total that ranks positions based upon their value, based upon what qualification, skills, and abilities within the organization into one of 10 pay grades. That is the system that currently exists and has existed since, I believe, 2005. It was originally adopted, 4 or 5. We also have a standard set of operating policies and procedures called personnel policies and procedures. And the contract that I currently work under includes those 2 systems, which I have agreed to. In 2002, originally, my original contract was negotiated between myself and the board. And since 2002, on either an annual or a biannual basis, has been reviewed. The last time the contract was upgraded was, I believe, 2012, if I remember right. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't. It was 2017. 2017 was the last time it was modified, and that was modified to address the agreements that had been reached with the remainder of the employees in the township. We have 2 bargaining units. One is the AFSCME bargaining unit, which is the non-professional, and I don't mean that demeaningly, but it's a non-professional class of employees, and then we also have the administrative and professional group. So those 2 contracts. And the contract was modified to address the changes in those 2 contracts. My basic philosophy over the term that I've been here has been not to be treated any differently than the rest of the staff. So I have in my contract agreed to abide by where my position as manager places within the classification compensation system. I don't negotiate my salaries with you on an annual basis. It's determined by what the salary grade 10 equates to in the marketplace. And that's been satisfactory for me. I have my benefits are tied to the same benefit package that all other employees have. I think that's only reasonable and fair, and that's why I've agreed to that year after year. So here we are 18 years later, and you have before you the opportunity to either continue in that mode by simply modifying my current agreement to be dated and based upon whatever salary is in place for the new township manager, or abandon both of those and simply negotiate a ground zero contract with whoever your selection for manager is. In other words, negotiate everything and come up with a new agreement. Now, either way, you're going to make a basic proposal to whoever the candidate that you select is, and it's going to go back and forth several times. So realistically, at this point, your determination that you need to make is, number one, whether you wish to continue to have your township manager position be contained in the classification compensation system and be contained in the same benefit packages as everybody else, and that's health insurance, retirement, life insurance, vacation, holidays, things such as that for consistency purposes. Or do you want to separate your new manager away from the rest of the staff and have a standalone relationship as your only employee, which the manager is. It's the only employee that you directly manage. So that's where you're at this point with regard to the contract. Personally, I think the contract as it currently sits is fair. That's why I've agreed to it year after year for the last 18 years. I think it's fair, I think it's reasonable, and it does not pitch your manager as a standalone away from the rest of your staff. So, and that is an issue in some organizations where the manager is kind of elevated to a level that nobody else ascribes to, basically, and it can cause some friction in the organization when it comes to collective bargaining or when it comes to cherry picking, if you want to call it that, in terms of better benefits and better pay and things such as that lead you down a path that may separate your staffs. So that's, again, that's just my personal philosophy, but that has been what we have followed. Prior boards have agreed to follow that same parameter, and from that point, I'll leave it to Roger, because Roger was involved in the modification in 2017. That is the current contract that was to have terminated December 31st, but we agreed to extend through May to allow you to go through this process.
Roger, do you have any follow-up?
Not unless you have some specific questions, because that pretty much sums up the board's options. There are some small things in the contract in terms of the length of vacation. If you were to decide to follow the existing contract, it would be a very easy prospect of cleaning it up and changing anything you wanted to change of minor terms. Days of vacation, as I say, might be one. The expiration date, is it going to be a 1-year contract? Is it going to be a 2-year contract? Those are all subject to a discussion, and we can insert those to whatever the board's preference might be, but I have nothing further to add unless there are specific questions.
What Roger's referring to is under the vacation, the current contract basically ties to my tenure being in the system for 18 years. I'm at a higher level of vacation than a new hire would be at. And that, that's a relatively minor. We have the policies establish what the standard vacation accrual process is, so that would simply be inserted.
And that's what had been discussed months ago when we started this process, before we even started interviewing, was what flexibility did we have with the candidates? And if that's important to the board, that brings you down to a generic contract that we would formulate ourselves. That involves, again, the health insurance, whatever the benefit package is, time off, and the wage. So if this board feels that the current contract is too restrictive to start with to make an offer, that's why I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to have a blank contract. And if there's things that are important to this board that we need to put in there, that's the distinction. So, does everybody understand? Randy did an excellent job of explaining the differences between the two. There is that Lansing mindset that the elected officials have all of these benefits and they tell us what to do, and they don't have to follow them. So there is that disparity when you're talking with employees. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that the candidate that we decide to make an offer to may not ask for something else. So we have the confinement of the current system or something open, whether, again, that's wages or the package, however you want to look at it. So I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page before we decide what to do with it, okay? Dave, I think you were first?
Pete was first.
Okay.
Roger, are you aware of any other township and their changes as far as the manager's agreements and that? Do you work with anyone else in drawing up agreements for other townships?
I do.
Is this the norm of what most of them are, or could you expand on that a little bit?
Different township, well, there aren't that many townships in the Upper Peninsula that even hire either a manager or a superintendent. You can hire either a superintendent or a manager. But among those that do, this is a fairly standard type of arrangement. However, I am aware of others that have the other option that Mr. Gerard was just describing. So it's, to some extent, it's the preference of the board.
Okay, Dave?
It would be my opinion that we should keep the format as it is and run it along the guidelines of the administration and professional group. We should make some obvious adjustments for vacation and that type of stuff, that back to where it started. And I would think the contract length would be something like 3 years. And I think the only thing we need to enter in there, other than make a few of those changes, is to put a probation period in there. And I think the probation period would be most convenient for the board if it was a 1-year probation, because it would go along with our annual evaluation. If we hired somebody this month or next month, his evaluation would be before the end of the year.
Okay. Ernie, were you next? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I agree with Dave. I think basically the contract is pretty well set, and that there's a number of things that we as a board must discuss as to where we want to go with it and that. The length of the contract is one item, the salary, the benefits, performance evaluations, and how long the contract, when it's going to commence and when it's going to leave. But other than that, the basic contract itself is, I think it pretty well addresses everything we want to do in it. So I think we as a board need to pick out the 5 or 6 things that we have to discuss and then come to an agreement and move forward on that too. So.
Okay. Randy?
I agree, the current contract has worked well for 18 years, and I really, it's kind of a little bit of a moot point, because if whatever candidate you select to have an offer to is going to be conditional. I mean, we can give them whatever we want, but they're going to end up coming back with a counter offer. So I think we could give them a standard contract that, and it sounds to me, I'm not, the board's happy with what we have now, and maybe just give that candidate that contract with the few revisions as mentioned, for the vacation and such. And they're going to counter offer anyway. So, that's what I think we should do, is just have a kind of a standard contract, make the few revisions as noted, with the vacation and probation and such, and then present that to the candidate that we make a conditional offer to, and see where it goes from there, because it's going to start a negotiation process anyway. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. John?
I thank our present manager for his opinion today. I agree that what we have in place with minor revisions is in order. I don't have a problem with that at all. But I do think that it would be appropriate, and if we were to, well, let me ask a question of the attorney. That's probably the best way to do that. Roger, if we were to make a motion, a conditional motion, to offer the contract to the candidate, that doesn't preclude other revisions that will come up and be in play. It doesn't mean that there won't be further discussion in detail about how we will further negotiate the finalization of a contract. So I'm bothered by the fact that previously we have made a conditional offer to another candidate, and we're not encumbered by the thought that we had to fix a contract in detail before we offered a conditional. So I just want to know whether, looking at the agenda, whether do we have to wait until we're through with item 5.1 before we get to 5.2 or not?
Is that to me, or that's Roger's question?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware of there actually being any conditional offer made to anyone at this point. There were some motions that failed.
Yes.
But there have been no offers that have been made.
That's correct. But there was no hesitation on it or requirement that further discussion about the contract prior to that motion.
Let me address that to the extent that and confirm that I'm understanding the question. Basically, at this point, the board has approved an agenda with 2 items, essentially: a discussion of the manager's contract and consideration of an application for position of township manager. So by approval of that, to now reverse those absent an amendment of the agenda would be out of order. And my understanding, based on past discussion of the board and a number of memorandums that I have provided on some guidance through the process, is that this is essentially a generic discussion on the contract of, regardless of who the applicant might be, that at some point you need to have a contract in place to offer to any candidate. So right now, you're talking about, do we want to proceed with the same type of contract that we have now, regardless of who the candidate is, or do we want to no longer adhere to that type of a contract and travel down a different road? Because there's a fork in the road, and really all you're addressing is the principle of, do we want to adhere to the same type of contractual arrangement at this point? And then if we do, there are some details in it that will have to be nailed down, and you've mentioned what some of those are in terms of the vacation and the salary and the length of the contract and so forth. And that's subpart, I guess, 1B, if you will, of your agenda item. But there is no need to jump to agenda item, I guess 5.2 as it's listed, before addressing 5.1.
Okay, would to satisfy what's been brought up, would it be okay to have a board consensus to remain with the present procedure? Would that be okay?
That would be satisfactory, because as the clerk mentioned...
Okay, I'll make that motion.
If you make a motion, it's not a consensus.
Okay.
You could come up with terms that we'd like, for example, a 3-year contract or a 6-month contract or a 10-year contract. That's completely within the prerogative of the board, but that may not be satisfactory, so that's always subject to further discussion and negotiation with whatever candidate you offer it to. So you're talking now in general principles of what you would like your contract to look like with whoever your candidate is, and that's fine to have a consensus in that respect.
But,
Or a motion, either way.
well, what I'm getting at is the discussion is, do we want to have a contract that is like the one that we have presently with our manager, or do we want to open the door to something else? Whether it's a consensus or a motion made, I think we can get through that quickly.
Okay, what I'm trying to establish, and this is probably the 4th time I've brought this to the board, is do you want to present to the candidate, whoever it is, the contract stating that they align with the rest of the employees in the professional and AFSCME units? Or do you want a standalone contract? It can be changed. I just want to know what we're going to present to the candidate.
Well, that's
I
what-
need something.
That's why I'm asking whether it needs to be a motion or a consensus.
Doesn't matter.
Either way, it would satisfy you, I think.
Yes, we just
Okay,
need something.
So,
Should we hear from the other two? Maybe they've got a better way of condensing it, or I don't want to stop you from a motion if that's what you want to do.
I'm going to wait for more input from the rest of the board.
Okay. Dan, I think you were next.
I can support this as it is, as long as it's non-binding and we can make changes to it. I can't support it if we're just going to say that this is it. If it's
There'll be a counter.
If it's negotiable, then it's a good starting point, and I think that's what we should go with as a starting point.
Okay. Dave?
I'd like to suggest maybe we've got a consensus on using the contract as it stands with an adjustment for the administration and professional groups guidelines. And with 3-year contract and 1-year probation, does that meet everybody's?
Support.
That's kind of the consensus so far. Well, the only adjustment we'd make then is to the vacation, if it's going to follow the compensation
Well, if you're going to,
system.
that's why I say using the guidelines of the administrative and professional group. That would take care of the rest of that, I believe, as far as vacation and that goes.
Is that a motion?
No, we don't need a motion, we can do it on
Consensus
consensus.
is fine.
John seconded. I
So
just
we
wanna
can
make
move
sure.
on.
I didn't hear a motion. I did hear a second, but there was no motion.
Correct. Ernie?
Going along with Dave, there's some things I think we need to discuss out in the open as to benefits. What is the benefits we're talking about as far as vacation and that? So we know, and what's going to happen in that too. So what would that be, being a new employee coming in and that?
If you go back to all the documentation I gave you, that's
I
what
couldn't,
it's.
I was looking the other day and I couldn't find it.
Okay, all right.
It's there.
So it's, Randy, 12 days
Sure.
of vacation the first
Yeah.
year, or?
Trustee Wiegand's motion would be sufficient to answer all of those questions because the bargaining agreement for the professional administrative unit clearly defines the vacation schedule. There is a beginning schedule and a progressive schedule that goes for the first 1 to 6 years, has a fixed number of days. Starting in year 6, you add 1 day per year of tenure going forward. So the health insurance package is the same package as everybody has in the township. It's a standard package. The holiday schedule is defined, the sick schedule is defined, the accrual schedules are defined in that agreement. So I would suggest that Trustee Wiegand's motion answers all of those questions that Treasurer Johnson has. The issue would then be the term of the contract, because the compensation system was included in that motion. So it would be salary grade 10, and the only thing that you would then be looking at would be where in salary grade 10 you would place the position based on the actual experience, training, and skills that whoever the candidate is has.
And if you remember, we advertised a time,
Minimum requirement of 3
Minimum
years
maximum.
of
The
experience. Yeah, well, you advertised for a level of degree, educational degree, a minimum bachelor's degree with a master's degree preferred, and at least 3 years of direct township management experience.
okay? So salary range was from 78,000 to 106,000, depending on qualifications, okay?
Which is the
Which-
2019 range, which as of January 1st, 2020, increased by 2.5%.
That's for your grade 10 thing,
That's
right?
grade 10, correct.
Okay. Roger?
Just briefly, in follow-up to Treasurer Johnson's inquiry, I happened to bring with me the vacation schedule because we've talked about it before, thought it might come into play. And it is, for a new hiree, it would be 12 days of vacation for years 1 through 5. 6 years and over increases 1 per year. And for the manager position, it indicates that the township manager must provide 30 days notice in advance of taking vacation. And exceptions may be made under certain circumstances. Won't read through the whole thing, but there is a written policy that addresses it, so your contract could be condensed into a shorthand version that essentially says the benefit package under the personnel policy for a new hiree.
So if we put this contract together, we can give it to Roger, or Randy actually could too, and fill in those blanks based on the compensation system, okay? So the term of the contract and the wage is really our variable to question. Once we've decided now that the consensus is to use the compensation system as the basis of the contract, we can decide on the wage and the term of the contract. I believe that'd be the only variables.
Correct. And basically what you're referring to is your offered contract. And as several trustees and officers of the board have indicated, whoever you offer this to may come back and request modification to meet their particular stand in life, basically. They may not need health insurance if they have health insurance from another source. They may want different holidays in exchange for some days of vacation. I mean, those relatively minor changes. But I think what you have before you is the framework of the working agreement that you would have with that candidate. Minor details would be subject to point-counterpoint discussions.
Is this becoming clearer now, what we're looking for? We have consensus on the structure of the contract. Wage and term would be next. Were we thinking 3 years? That was not really a motion, but 3 years with a 1-year probation? Does that sound reasonable?
To me, that's fine with me.
Randy, you had your hand up?
I don't know if you can give a wage because it depends on the candidate and it's depending on qualifications. So you can't really put a wage out there right now. You have to wait to whatever candidate you offer it to, and then you have to look at the compensation system addresses with the point factor system, if I'm correct, Randy.
That's correct.
It will place them on that scale somewhere, so.
Yeah. Whoever your candidate is that you make the offer to, we would have to calculate where that would fall on the grade 10 scale. It's an 8-step scale, basically based on years of service.
So, and I think that's pretty really set in stone on how you do that. It's not a, but of course, what we put down according to that system, again, can be negotiated, so.
Well, the language you would insert in the contract is salary determined based upon qualifications.
Correct.
Okay, and leave it blank?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dave, I think you were.
Yeah, I would think that what we're looking for initially is a blank contract with the inclusion of some probation, and the length of the contract could be in there. After that, it depends on, once we get that back, the board can review that contract based on not only us offering a conditional employment, but also the candidate accepting the offer. And then it can be considered and the rest of the blanks can be filled in, but you can't do anything else besides, I mean, obviously, things have to be in there. The probation period, which hasn't been there for 17 years.
Okay.
Well, actually, it's there every year.
John?
Have we satisfied the manager's contract for now?
I think so.
And once the board determines who you wish to offer the position to, I can identify what that particular salary rate would be based upon their qualification, skills, and abilities within the system. The classification system will determine that.
So we could direct either Randy or Roger, and then maybe Randy and then give it to Roger for final approval, to fill in the blanks and bring it back to us. So we have a working document, correct? Does that sound right? Ernie, you next?
I think the biggest thing is when the agreement will become effective. That's something we'll have to look at.
It kind of depends on what the candidate.
Well, certainly, anybody you're going to offer the position to, is, if they're currently employed, is going to have to give notice of some sort, and their current position will determine what that is, and, you know, that's all part of, again, that's all part of your negotiating process. Once you determine who your candidate is that you wish, what's an acceptable starting date for you? You know, if they have to come from outside of the area, there's going to be relocation time. If they're local, there's not going to be. It could be a sooner start. So, but again, those are the details that once you make the offer to the candidate, get worked out in your back and forth.
I think the biggest thing is once it comes back to the board can then look at it, and to me, I don't think there's gonna be many changes once Roger gets back to it and that, then we know in front of us what's there, then we can move forward. I think so.
Okay, Pete?
The candidate might request some changes because you're talking to a person who's been ending an 18-year career and someone who's hopefully starting an 18-year career. So the difference in situations as far as personal and business and stuff like that. So you're gonna have some kind of discussion later on. That's
John?
fine.
Are we on item 2?
No, not yet. Unless we're okay.
I'm okay.
I think we got a consensus.
Do we need to have a motion? Does anybody feel like we have to have one?
No.
I'm telling it? Okay. I just want to make sure.
So it'll be a consensus, so the minutes will reflect it's consensus of the board that we use the original contract as a frame moving forward, with some minor revisions.
And it would be returned back to the board for review.
Well, it will happen anyway. I don't have to put that in there, but it will happen. Everything comes back to the board, so.
Okay. Now we can go to, sir? Oh, sorry, Randy. Go ahead.
To shorten your deliberations, as I understand it at this point, you have accepted the current format of the contract that I currently serve under, with the exception that you will insert the defining language of the vacation accrual process, tie the rest of the contract to the administrative and professionals bargaining unit for benefits and including days off and sick leave and things such as that, with the determination of the offered salary to be contingent upon whoever it is you intend to offer the position to's background, skills, and abilities that I can calculate a dollar amount for. So really, the only thing that would be pending would be that last item. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
With the 3-year contract with the 1-year probation added. Right?
Yes. Which I think is a reasonable term for you and for whoever the candidate is. Gives you 6 months, basically, hopefully, of performance to evaluate by the end of the year, and then go forward or not go forward for the next 2.
Well, and the 3-year idea lines up with the election, too.
Correct.
So that the next board.
Keeps you out of the election
Yeah.
cycle.
Keeps it a little easier to deal with the year before the election, the next election. Okay? All right. John?
Are we on item 2?
I think we're on 2. All right, consideration of applicant for the position of township manager.
You're on.
Go ahead.
I move.
You're on.
My motion is to give Dennis Leitman
Limita.
a conditional offer of employment for Marquette Charter Township manager.
And I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Go ahead, John, if you have further comments or anything.
No, I think we've gone through it.
Okay, Pete?
I just think he's the best person for our township at this time.
Okay. Ernie?
Do we have to indicate anything in the motion about the contract coming through at a point in time or that, or is this enough at this point in time?
Well, it's contingent upon reaching a satisfactory agreement of terms of the contract itself. So
It'd
that,
still be conditional on any other background checks or any
absolutely,
of the processes that the township goes through anyway.
yes.
A conditional contract will be submitted to the individual for their review, and I can almost say that something's gonna come back to us in that, so.
Okay. Randy?
Your existing process that I'm presuming we are now going to be following, our standard process, dictates how this will work, basically. You have a motion on the floor that's been seconded, and if the motion is carried, I now know who the candidate is that you wish to offer the position to. I can confirm with you what the salary, offering salary would be, and that, the process basically is you would now make a conditional offer presenting that proposed contract to the individual, who will then have the opportunity to either accept that as offered or come back to you with a proposed alteration of some sort. Now, that is your standard process that you would now follow.
Ernie?
Okay, to follow up on that, we've identified the individual. We're gonna have a contract that's gonna come back to the board for review before it's been presented to the applicant. That's my understanding in that. Or is it gonna go directly? And the next question I have is, who's gonna do the presentation and who's gonna do the negotiation with the candidate, if there is any?
First answer to, the answer to the first question is, you could have that tomorrow, the contract, if you want. I can very easily, I do not have the background material yet. I've not seen any of the background material for any of your candidates, so I need to have that so I can evaluate where it would fall in the pay structure. Once I have that, it's a very quick process to calculate that out. I could have that for you tomorrow, so you could have potentially, I think Roger can produce the remainder of the changes in the contract relatively quickly, which would then fall back to you, since this is your employee that you're hiring, and whoever, whether you wish it to be the supervisor or the board as a whole, or the officers, or however, that's a determination you make in terms of who would present the offer. Typically, it would be for me, the township manager, if we followed our normal process, but we have not followed that process. So I would suggest that it would be from the township supervisor.
And the statutory personnel director
Correct.
presented to the candidate and bring his offer back to you, or counter offer or acceptance. Call a special meeting and bring it back to you.
Does that have to be in the motion?
No.
Not if we're following the compensation system, I wouldn't think.
You have to vote on the candidate first.
We're still talking. Dave?
Well, I hate to rain on everybody's parade, but, and I'm a fan of Dennis's. We get along great, I consider him a friend, but having said that, the pay range was advertised. He stated on 2 separate occasions that that pay range is not sufficient. In looking at his employment information for where he's at, he was $150,000 a year, and we're, as near as I can tell, about $44,000 apart. And he has indicated that in his cover letter that he's not able to accept the pay range that was advertised, and he would instead choose to come back to Marquette when he retires. During the interview on January 3rd, there was a whole discussion, as inappropriate as it may have been, where he was indicating that we need to look at a different method to determine pay, and that, again, he would not be able to accept the pay range that was advertised. For those reasons, I'm not going to be able to support this.
Okay. Pete, were you first? I think?
That's all we have to do is talk to him, give him the contract, and then the negotiation could start after that. You know, he might change his mind, a lot of things has happened, so just go the steps that we already laid out, present the contract, and go from there.
Randy?
Again, on your standard procedure, under the existing contract, what you advertised is what you have available to offer, which is grade 10 under the current structure, which I had mentioned previously as of January 1st increased by 2.5% because you carry it over into another year. So that is not in violation of what you offered. If it's unsatisfactory to your candidate, the candidate can come back in response to the contract that you've proposed and make an alternative offer, such as, I don't need health insurance, or whatever, and that would then change your compensation package cost. You basically would be moving within the same structure to a different salary range with no health insurance, which equalizes. So that, again, you make the offer is either accepted or a counteroffer proposal is made, at which time you then make determinations whether you can meet it or you can't meet it. At some point, you have a system in place. If you wish to follow that system, that's what you have. Question about the difference in the wages, they're two different positions that you're talking about. One is manager, the other that the current position is superintendent, which is a statutory position that falls between manager and board member. So it's a higher level of position. You do not have a superintendent. You have a manager. So that does not command superintendent wages. So I guess you make an offer and there's a response.
John?
Following procedure that's in place, if I understand it correctly, the offer would be made by our present manager to the candidate. No?
Supervisor.
Make it through the supervisor, that's fine. We have a motion before us, I wonder if we could have a roll call vote.
Okay. Anything else?
I feel we should let him decide if that's an offer that he wants to accept or not accept.
It's the only thing we can do
Yes.
until we get something different.
Right. Otherwise, you depart from your system, your structure, which is the other contract option that you have.
Which is why I presented it, in case there were those who felt that they wanted to do something different.
I'll call a question.
Okay, Randy?
Okay, trustee Marks,
Yes?
trustee LaRue,
Yes.
trustee Wiegand,
No.
trustee Everson,
Yes.
treasurer Johnson,
Yes.
clerk Rattari is yes, and supervisor Durant.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1.
Okay, so we know how to fill in the blanks on the contract. I believe I've got a blank contract, Randy, online. I can get it to you tomorrow, today.
He's got it.
He doesn't actually.
Okay.
Fill in the blank, zip it to Roger, make sure it's filled in right. You need to see it. You were the one that did this in 17.
I can have that with, I probably should look at it, and I can have that with a 24-hour turnaround time.
Same.
Okay. Okay, then I'll just call him when I get the final document with the final numbers. See what happens. If he comes with a counteroffer, we'll call a special meeting. Okay.
So,
Randy,
yeah.
I can tell the wheels are turning.
No, I was just gonna say, your normal process would be the initial contact followed up by a written offer.
Anything else? All right, public comment. Anybody want to share anything?
You know, I normally wouldn't, but I will.
Come on,
Totally
Tom.
fine.
Come on, Tom.
Chance, go for it.
I will, because, boy, I've been involved in this before. And
Name and address, please.
Tom Swick, 1040 Vistana Drive. I've been involved in this many, many times, and it's a hard thing to do. From ministers of a church, we had a minister that was at our church for 25 years. Fantastic man, had to leave, his mother was ill, and we could never give him more than $58,000 a year. That was it, after 25 years. Couldn't come up with that. Put an application out there, and I mean, like I say, this guy was a fine man, really performed. Couldn't even get a candidate for less than 70-some. So, in Randy's defense, and he just kind of gave the reason why he was not expecting it to be in his, the superintendent is a different position, but I guess you really got to look at what the person brings to the table. And no, you don't give them the world. I'm just saying, in hiring people in my company, there was many times where the person that was sitting in the chair next to him, in order to get this person, I had to pay him 20% more. But I looked at what he brought to the game. What kind of the same thing as when I, hiring a man, and this guy can produce this much income or revenue to our company, and this guy can produce this much revenue. Both fine gentlemen, but boy, is one worth more to the company than the other? Yes, they are. So, sorry to get my nose in that, but I just was listening, and I remember these same things going on in my company and at a church where a fine minister of 25 years, and they couldn't get, the church could never give them more than, guess what? They were offering the higher wage, or they weren't going to get somebody to even come to even apply for the job. So it's a tough thing to do, though. It is for a board, because you're controlling the money of the community. You're tasked with that responsibility. So I commend you, but it's a strange thing you have to do sometimes. So.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
It's even stranger when you have to do it in front of a camera.
Yes, it is. It is very much.
Very difficult.
We'll get us 712 calls by now.
Any other comments? Okay. Board member comment. Anything anybody wants to share? Sure, now you're quiet. Pete?
I really believe that we made the right decision. As far as we always say, it's good to go to the outside sometime, find a person from a larger area that bring their experience back to us. And I think Dennis been here. He went to a larger Grand Blanc down there, a larger township. And I think a lot of the things he's done down there he can bring back to us. And I think the township would be in better shape. And that's why I really do. I looked at there are different ones. I went back listened to the interviews again a couple times. And I'm very comfortable in saying that I think we made the right choice.
Well, and as Randy pointed out, the superintendent's position is very different. It's not the supervisor and it's not the manager. And it has more responsibility, which would generate more income for the most part. So he will have less, and I asked him that. Can you step down? Will you be able to back off from being so responsible and in charge of everything? And he goes, yeah, no problem. So, Dan, go ahead.
I agree with Pete. I think we made a great decision. I think he's a fantastic person. He will make an excellent township manager if he accepts our offer. I look forward to hopefully him coming up here and fitting in, and I hope that we can make him a decent offer and get him to come up. So he's a good person.
I agree with everything. The one thing you have to realize is, and Randy, you may have to correct me, I think our budget on a year is 7 million, Randy, something like that?
Total.
Budget down there is 50 million. So you see the differential dollar amount that they can play with, and we don't have that facility. So you have to be careful in some of that, so. And also the manpower that he was overseeing was a lot more than we have here, so there's things you have to work in, and you try to make a good decision overall, and try to make it all work out. So it's hard to do in that.
It's relative. Anything else?
I would say this board is wise beyond its size. I'm always impressed with what's come on.
Some people think so.
You are. I've seen a lot in there. Wise beyond your size.
Thank you.
My wife said that once.
Well, it's collectively we're wise. Randy, you want to review the motion?
Pete's Loretta's.
Oh, sorry. I thought that was you last time. Go ahead, leave it. You want to speak again?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think some of the things that we deal with is people coming
Put your
from,
microphone on, Pete.
we deal with is people coming from outside of the, say, the townships and that. You usually go in, the manager or the boss or whatever is elevated a little bit higher than the norm. In our case, it's different, and that's what they deal with. When you go negotiate it for a contract, or, for a job, it's not the same as you're entering with the entry-level people. It's different, because they are the boss, they're responsible for everybody, not just a certain crew or anything like that, so sometimes they struggle with that, so.
Okay. Dan?
I just have one last thing to say. I'd like to thank all you guys for coming out and supporting Dennis and his endeavor to come up here for manager. It means a lot to see all the support that he does have, so thank you.
Randy?
Are Roger and I responding to you tomorrow? Is that your plan? I mean,
Yeah.
I just
24
wanted to
hours.
clarify.
That's the
you know,
motion. Yep.
You know, and realistically, people don't understand township government generally. Whether it's the governor or the rank and file person living in any of the residential areas, the intricacies of township government, particularly charter townships, is not well understood. The discussion tonight regarding the manager versus superintendent, manager only exists and only has the authorities that are specifically delegated from the elected township supervisor. That's it. Superintendent is a statutory position. It has ability to act and commit the township without board approval. That's why it's higher classified, generally higher paid, and there aren't very many of them, only in larger townships. In this particular township, your costs to operate are spread over 3,900 residents. In Grand Blanc Township, those costs are spread over 85,000 residents. So the scale, as Treasurer Johnson mentioned, the scale is dramatically different in terms of skills, abilities, qualifications to be operating and managing that kind of a community that has a full-time fire department, a full-time police department, full services for 85,000 people, 5 separate bargaining units, a large number of employees. We have 22 employees total. And he's got 120 to 130. But I mean, those are the scales that you're talking about. So what you're doing is you are offering an opportunity predicated upon the value in this community. And the determination as to whether that's acceptable or not is on the individual being offered. You may have a response back that would be totally apart from what you're offering in terms of your contract. It may be a different format of a contract that will get you off into discussion of a different kind of a employment relationship, but you still have a budgetary constraint. As Treasurer Johnson mentioned, you have a total cost package for your manager's position. How that's allocated within those dollars is totally up to you and your candidate. So you don't necessarily need to go outside your budget parameters, but you may be in a position to offer a different salary level in the absence of some other equally valued benefit. So, I mean, you have some flexibility there, depending on what the two parties can come to agreement on. So you're making an offer, and I think you should expect, well, you do expect a response, either a full acceptance or a proposed modification that you may or may not be able to approve. So that's where you're at. It's the same as any other employment situation, as Mr. Swick mentioned. You know, things are fluid. You've had the benefit of me being here 18 years, and I started at a much lower salary, and over time, I'm comfortable with it. Your next manager may not be. Your compensation system basically says that's what it's worth, what you offered.
Okay, Dave?
And just so we know where we're headed here, it's up until the point that we have accepted a contract at this point, our discussions from this point on, closed session?
No.
No?
Has to be open session.
Negotiating a collective bargaining agreement, that's one of.
Okay.
This would be subject to the Open Meetings Act unless something unusual comes up that I can't anticipate.
Okay.
Yeah, from this point on, everything's public.
Okay. Anything else? Randy?
Okay, the first motion was the approval of the agenda, and that, of course, passed. The next item, discussion of the manager's contract, was not a motion, but it was a consensus of the board, which is sort of an action item, but it wasn't a motion, that we use the existing framework of the existing contract for the applicant. And then the number 2, consideration of applicant for this position of the township manager, Dennis Lemata, conditional offer employment for Marquette Township, that passed 6-1. That's it.
Okay, we just need one more
I
motion.
move to adjourn.
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 4:18 PM, folks.